Good morning, everyone. I'm coming to you from our beautiful studio in our house. This is the last sermon that I'm going to give with you, and so I want to accomplish two things. One is to celebrate Father's Day, which is one of my favorite celebrations, and then also to share some thoughts with you about our time together and to say goodbye. So let's start with this reflection with a passage from Piero Ferrucci, an Italian psychologist, from a book, What Our Children Teach Us. He writes, quote, "And what of the gender role? According to some research, being a parent accentuates one's sexual identity. A man becomes more of a man, a woman becomes more of a woman. Not so for me. I have become more of a woman. In fact, I've realized that apart from several physiological functions, such as giving birth and breastfeeding, we are all pretty much the same. Fathers and mothers alike are all capable, if we choose, of loving our kids, protecting, nurturing, stimulating, and guiding them, of playing with dolls or with toy trains. Being a parent has allowed me to overcome the artificial barriers between the two genders. It has helped put me in touch with acts and sentiments traditionally assigned to women: nurturing, tenderness, protectiveness, from which men in our society are generally exiled. Call it the feminine side if you wish. I prefer not to name it, simply to regard it as another part of myself." Unquote. When I was a kid, roles between father and mother were better defined, and this is true for many of you as well. Father usually earned the living for the family. He came home in the evening, weary, dusty and dirty, or wrapped in his suit and tie. I know I always looked forward to the hug from my dad at the door. I loved the way his suit smelled smoky and the strength of his hug. I knew he was tired and needed the hug as much as I did. Dads in those days were only really available on the weekends, and then we had to compete with sports events, mowing the lawn, mom's list of chores, and afternoon naps. My dad read to us every Sunday morning before church. Wind in the Willows, Robinson Crusoe, Gulliver's Travels, and of course, the funny papers. We all went to church together and came home to my mother's huge Sunday meal with the extended family. Dad sat in the living room and chatted with the other men during all the preparations. In those days, a dad was more likely to spend time with his sons than his daughters, leaving their lives to their mother. My dad and brother spent hours together in the garage, building radios and doing other scientific things. Dad assumed I wasn't interested, and for the most part, he was right. I felt intensely excluded. They wanted to focus on what they were doing, and I wanted them to focus on me. In those days, boys were given boy toys and girls were given girl toys. Boys did sports or science or debating. Girls did ballet or horseback riding or skating. Dads told girls they were pretty. Yes, my dad said that to me. And oh, how much that meant to me. He also admired my handwriting and my ability to read and write. I wanted so much to please him. When another girl got the best grade in the class on her book report in the 6th grade, I was devastated, sure that my dad would no longer be proud of me. Pleasing a father usually took the form of choosing the right career, one that Dad could relate to, maybe even the family business, so Dad could show us the ropes. This was more important for boys than girls, even in the heyday of the women's movement. But I took on this mission as well. I studied biology and chemistry and hoped to be a research scientist. It would not have occurred to me to choose something he couldn't relate to. I learned to do some repairs on the series of used cars I owned. I worked in all male professions for the first few years of my career. Mostly dads were happy to see us forge our way into the world on our own. relieved of the financial burden, if indeed they were, and happy to let us go and come back to visit. When I told my parents I was moving out for good the next weekend, my mother cried, but my dad helped me move. Fathers encouraged independence. They watched with a kind of proprietary enjoyment while we created our lives. My dad bought me a toolbox with a set of household tools when I was a teenager. I kept it for nearly 40 years, adding to it until it was finally stolen from my garage in Texas. Dads didn't tell us how they felt unless they were angry. They didn't cry or let on how they felt about anything directly. We had to read their inner life from small details. Many dads of my father's generation were especially stoical, uncomplaining. My father was one such silent type. I don't know the reasons for his particular reticence. His feelings, his thoughts, for the most part, were private. I was only privy to his quick, hearty laughter at comedy and his love of jazz music, which is a music full of passion, born of oppression. Whether this was a personal or cultural oppression my father lived under, I will never know. He remained kind, welcoming, intelligent, and ever silent about anything personal. There was always a part of me that wanted to reach him and connect with him. I sent him a framed collage of his childhood pictures for Father's Day one year. Perhaps I wanted to stir up something in him. His feelings about the death of his mother when he was 8, the love he had for her and she for him, a time in his early 20s when he met my mother. I was longing for something he couldn't give. I wanted him to know how important he was to me. I imagine there's lots of sons and daughters like me still waiting for that voice from Dad. Todd Gitlin wrote a book about his silent, estranged father who either jumped or fell in front of a subway train. The son doesn't know which. His father left him a stack of diaries from what he called the abandonment years, in which he wrote down his inner thoughts and feelings and fears. The father's attorney gives him the books, saying he wanted you to have them. And the emotionally starved son devours them, not wanting the words to end. Father, say more, he appeals to the dust-covered books. I can take it. This silence has engendered, I believe, a kind of erasure of father from our vocabulary. Mothers are lavished gifts and nurturing on Mother's Day. They are celebrated. Mother is portrayed as beautiful, significant, responsible for all the good and bad in their children. Father's Day has always been a rather second place in celebration. Fathers are deemed less important to the family, to the children. They are not to be pampered, revered, and held accountable, even to the family in the same way. There are so many single parents in our society now, and most of us are women. But there are male single parents. We don't talk about them that much. And from what I've observed, this silence of the older generation is not reflective of the young fathers of today. Men are taking more and more direct responsibility for their kids. This trend is somewhat masked by the economic pressures that keep both parents working too many hours. But I see young fathers very much like Ferrucci describes himself, willing not just to take on a female role, but to expand their sense of self to include nurturing, tenderness, and protectiveness. They are not concerned about their masculinity being undermined by caring for their kids. There has been a true evolution. I also notice that fathers are not just male mothers at all. Men still tend to let their children take more risks than women do. They know that getting hurt within reason is part of learning about the world. Men are more apt to join in games that are silly or highly physical. Years ago, when I sat down next to two men talking in a restaurant, I expected to overhear business or sports talk. What I hear now is men comparing notes about how to raise their kids. What this could mean for our whole society is pretty exciting as well. So, all of this to say that it's time to celebrate fathers again, to hold them up, pamper them, applaud them, acknowledge how very much they are needed and wanted, to affirm the new steps young fathers are taking, to acknowledge the way this affects their fathers if they are fortunate enough to see it and be enlivened by it, and to acknowledge the positive ways that this affects women. I am grateful for all of the memories I have of my father. His gentleness, his way of standing up for me, his reliability, his devotion to my mother, and quiet encouragement. And so I say, Happy Father's Day to all of you fathers. Never doubt the profound effect you have on your children or how much they truly need you. So I'm turning now to the task of talking about what this interim period has meant to me, to you, and what I've observed in this time. These 2 years have been a time of letting go, stepping back, reassessing your strength and weaknesses, and then moving forward with greater certainty and sense of purpose. It's been such a pleasure to see you leave behind thoughts of inadequacy that hung over your spirits 2 years ago in the wake of the conflicts that occurred with your previous minister. In courageously examining the validity of the images you were left with and allowing yourself to see how competent, kind, and truly dynamic you are, you've been able to accomplish something you thought wouldn't happen: finding and calling a new settled minister, one that truly affirms you as a congregation and is looking forward as much to being your minister as you are having her join you. For my part, I have encouraged you to talk to each other and not make a secret of any worries or concerns you might have at First U. You have shared a great deal that you've kept hidden out of fear that you were, quote, the only one, unquote. Sadly, and also gladly, you were not the only one, and others were able to validate your experiences and add their own. Not just private hurts, but the anger and frustration that others left you to run the church on your own when you hung in there and kept things going. You had the courage to talk with each other about that as well, which cleared up misconceptions about why you each acted the way you did. Anger turned into apologies and frustration into understanding. Tears of happiness and sadness were shed, cleansing tears. I felt honored to be a witness to this unfolding of the new. I hope you see that this process can be a tool that you can use when future conflicts arise. Sharing in an intentionally safe circle can reveal what is hidden and what needs to be shared to reach understanding. I hope you will resort to this rather than returning to secrecy and assumptions about each other. You now know that you can do this, and I have no doubt that Reverend Hillary will be a fabulous listener and witness to your growth. These are the most important aspects of your transition time. But let me couch this in terms of the 5 focal points of interim ministry, as they are now called. The first is reviewing your history and any unresolved conflicts. You did a timeline of your history and spent many hours resolving conflicts with courage and grace. The second is discovering a new shared identity as a church. You have reflected deeply about your identity, and this will be an ongoing process as you continue to mature into your future goals. The third is dealing with leadership shifts, which includes staff and lay leaders. You've had a pretty solid team of leaders who congealed as a result of your determination to go forward, especially in the area of social justice. You developed a leadership development team, which you are guiding into a role of growing new leaders. You revitalized the RE Council and hired some teachers to focus on children's RE. You started up adult RE classes again with the very timely book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. The fourth focal point is renewing denominational connections, and this you have done by using the UUA transitions process to do your search. You also set the record straight about the years that your former minister led your ministry. You wrote to the UUA and dispelled the myth that there was any wrongdoing by the church toward that minister. It was an affirmation of your powers of understanding. The fifth focal point is preparing for new leadership by communicating who you are, now that you know, to a new settled minister who is worthy of your trust and loyalty, which will be fully reciprocated. This is cause for celebration. General Assembly is very accessible this year since it will all be virtual and only $150 for the entire GA. I hope we are able to see each other in the seminars sometime. In July, I will be packing up to go to Fort Worth, Texas, where I will continue to socially distance. Texas made the mistake of opening too aggressively, and now their COVID cases are rising higher than anywhere. Don't worry, I'll stay safe, and I hope you will too. I will be coming to the office before I leave to pick up my books and a few other things. I will be leaving a painted rock in the Peace Garden that says joy on it, something to remember me by. I love you all. Thank you for being such a loving and fun group. Jennifer and I will never forget the trip to Transylvania with Marge, Pete, Ann, and David. Nor will I forget our worship services, Sam's music, the choir, and the great times for all ages. I won't forget how you made congregational meetings joyful and meaningful and not the drudge they can be in churches. I also am glad I got to experience Clam Fest, and I hope it won't be the last one for you, or perhaps you'll have something new in mind that when it all opens up again. Thank you for sharing your great cooking and your beautiful children, not to mention your lovely pets and sprightly gardens. Thank you for your sharing and generosity. You are all in my heart. I have quite a collection of people there, and there is always room for more. I'm reminded of the words to the hymn, "My life flows on in endless song, above earth's lamentation. I hear the real but far off hymn that hails a new creation." Go in peace, my friends.